Hi, I'm Claire Manning and welcome to my channel. On today's crafty video, I'm going to be showing you some pencil colouring techniques with one of the stamps called Full Bloom from my brand new Hello World collection for Claire Manning Creative. This is the card that we're going to be making. It's really simple with one stamp, and then I'm going to go through how I use some very simple pencil techniques to get a shaded effect. So this is how the stamp it's one huge stamp, so it comes and you just literally do either with a block or your stamping platform, and I've just stamped it in some black ink. You've got this lovely floral all over design, or areas that you can even cut out if you want. So as I say, I use VersaFine, and you could use a black, a grey or something paler if you want. And that I find that doesn't smudge then with my pencils as long as I've let it dry for a few seconds. I'm going to be using these Faber Castell absolutely amazing oil-based pencils. I've only used them a few times, so I'm getting used to them, but they blend really well and the colours are absolutely stunning. So I'm going to stick to a classic kind of colour combo for flowers today. I'm going to pick a selection of pinks and greens, and I'm going to basically try and get an effect where we've got some light and shade on there, but without worrying too much about where the light source is coming from. Just get a kind of more 3D effect on those flowers. Got a couple of yellows as well for the centre of the flowers, the greens for the leaves, and then what I really want to do with the white space that is left outside of the flowers is use some greys to make those flowers pop off even more, creating a bit of shadow around them. So I'll go through that too. Just choosing my greens. It's a lovely relaxing thing to do, pencil colouring. It does take a while. It's not as quick as when I do watercolouring, things like that, but when you want to be in the moment and enjoy and relax, it is lovely to do. So before colouring anything, as in like pink flowers or green leaves, what I do is I tend to put some almost like a wash of colour down. So I've used this very pale kind of creamy yellow. And what I find by doing this on the flowers and the leaves is that if you do miss any areas or the white starts to show through on your colouring bin as you work up in light layers, it stops it being that stark white and gives it more kind of depth of colour behind it. I just find it works really well. So although again it's a little bit of a time consuming thing to add another layer, think of it like if you were doing watercolouring, you would put probably a light wash all over before starting to build up your light and shade. This is exactly the same. And talking of that, you do work the same as you do with watercolours, from light to dark. So I do layer upon layer upon layer of colour until I'm happy with the depth and the shading. I'm just adding some darker yellow to the centre of that flower. And now I'm going to start with the pinks. So the lightest of the pinks, I'm adding some colour in light strokes to the base of the leaf, and then kind of, if I'm using a flicking motion, I can kind of blend it out without making too much of a mess or getting lines in your work. So I'll show you the stroke in a minute that I'm using, because it looks like I'm doing a scribbling motion, but actually I'm not. I'm using a flick, so my pencil is leaving the paper as it gets to the end of the stroke and coming back down again. I tend to use a combination of this stroke and a kind of circular motion depending on what I'm doing, but to add this colour and start to get a little bit of shade in areas, just going over, doing that flicky motion yet again. Making sure it's darkest at the base of the leaf, the petal, and the centre of the flower. So just work round, petal at a time. I'm thinking about some basic shading, as in where the petals overlap it might go darker on the underneath one, but we don't have to add too much shading yet. It's better to go really lightly and work up in your layers rather than start pressing too hard on your pencils and then getting an effect that's too hard to undo. It's much easier to just add more colour as you need it rather than take it away. So this stamp will be available on the Hello World launch at 6 p.m. on August the 2nd. I'm doing a live YouTube with demonstrations, and the designs as part of that collection will be live on the website at the same time. So this is that technique. I'm doing it in slow-mo though, so you can see it's different than the kind of scribble up and down that I did the second time there, and it just gives you a much more even finish. So there's parts of this video that I've sped up just because it probably took in total about 2.5 hours for me to colour this. So there's parts that I'm going to speed up or even not talk through to allow you to enjoy the colouring. I'm basically going round the petals now, doing exactly the same as I've just done. I'm having a little stretch of my hand there. Some of you may know I have a joint condition called joint hypermobility syndrome that affects the collagen in my joints, and I find that if I stay in one position, regardless of whether it's my knees, my hands, whatever, I start getting a bit stiff and a bit painful. So I just find if I stretch my hand out occasionally, or even just take a break and come back to it if it's getting too much, then that's absolutely fine. That allows me to still continue then and do the colouring that I love without thinking that I have to do it all in one go, which is one of the benefits of pencil colouring, I imagine, compared to, say, acrylics or oils where you really need to finish at least that layer. You can drop your pencil at any time and come back to it later. So back to my pinks now. I'm taking a next shade up a little bit darker and a little bit warmer, and I'm going over the areas where I added more colour with the lighter pink, and I'm just doing the exact same technique again and pressing a tiny bit harder, and I'm just now adding some extra shading. So I'm starting right at the edge, so I know that that's the bit that I want to be darker, and then I'm loosening the pressure on the pencil to continue to blend that into the rest of the petal. That crease there in the petal, I'm using that as well as somewhere to add some more shade. And there's some little gaps in the centre of the flower that I'm filling in with this darker. And then I will essentially go around all of the petals again, just adding the next layer. Okay, so next up here I'm going to add in some of these darker and brighter reds. So I'm just having a look which one goes nicely. The vermilion red is what I've just used. I will mark underneath the colours that I used in case you've got this set and want to use the same ones. Faber Castell pencils are not the cheapest on the market. They are an art pencil, but they're very different to the kind of standard colouring pencils that you would get from a stationery shop. They are very, very high quality and really easily blendable. So you know, if you're into this kind of colouring, personally, I think it's worth investing in a really good set of pencils. But of course, if you've got a set of pencils that you love, another oil set, go ahead. Or you could try doing with watercolour pencils and then adding some water with a brush. In fact, this stamp works really well coloured in any medium that you've got. So I'm using that darker colour to go over the really intense bit of shading that I want. It's really adding some depth now, and I'm blending it in with the light and the medium colour that I've already put down. Like I say, it's just building layers, not doing too much at a time until you are happy. Okay, so I'm pretty much done with the shading on those petals now. I'm going to go on to the leaves in a moment, and I will start by using that yellowy creamy colour again and putting down some base colour so not too much white shines through on the leaves. So it's exactly the same process. I'm going to use the vines in the leaves to give us a bit of an idea about where to add shading. So just adding a layer of that creamy yellow again all over the leaves before we add some of the lighter and then working up to the darker greens. As I did with the petal, once you add the darker ones, you might find that you need to go back in with a lighter colour and just do a bit of extra blending just to make sure you get a nice smooth finish. Just adding some extra yellow into the centre of those flowers just to make it a little bit more vibrant and make it pop a little bit more. So just pretty much a wash of the lightest green all over that creamy yellow then. And then now this is kind of like an olivey green. This is where I'm going to go alongside the veins in those leaves and just start adding some extra colour. Using either that flick or that circular motion again like before, and just adding a bit more colour to the base of the leaf where it's coming from underneath the flower than at the edges. Continuing to work now, adding layers and layers of the darker greens and then blending them in exactly the same as the petals on the flower. Just working in light layers and then building up slowly until you're happy with the amount of depth and shade that you've got. You can see already how much more 3D the flower looks than the rest where it's just flat. And if you did say a flat coloured petal for comparison, it would look hugely different than just colouring all over in one pencil stroke and one colour. So it is really a worth spending the time on for say a special card or a piece of art that you want to hang on the wall. Plus it's great practice for your pencil skills if you're looking to improve those. Like I said earlier, it is a more timely way to colour, but it's very, very enjoyable. Okay, so now I'm just showing you how I'm adding some shadow around the main flowers and leaf to make it pop out from the page even more. I've got 3 shades of grey, a light, a medium and a dark, and I'm just going really lightly with the light one all the way around that flower and leaf, and then I'm going in with a medium one just at the edge, right on the edge of the outline of the flower, just in a stroke motion, in that light flicking. Don't worry if it doesn't blend amazingly the first time, we can go back in with that light, but the key really is to keep your strokes light and the handle of the pencil light. Here you can see I've just gone back in with the light one just to blend it. And then what we'll do finally is add some of the dark, really intense at the very edge, hardly coming out at all, maybe coming out a millimetre or 2. If I'm pausing there as I colour, it's probably because I'm putting my head right back. Sometimes you can find that you start colouring and your head goes down, you're concentrating really hard, and sometimes just to get some perspective and make sure you do what you're doing is how you want it to look, just pull your head back, remind yourself to just look at it from a distance a little bit. So that's really added that depth and dimension. So I did the rest of the design off camera just because the amount of time it took, but I used the exact same techniques and this was the final result. Really happy with it. I'm not a pencil colouring expert, but I'm really happy with just some simple techniques I was managing to get that effect. So now I'm going to add a sentiment from the Happy Everything set that also launches on the 2nd. You get this big solid happy and then lots of different sentiments that can layer over with the scripty font. So I'm just going to grab my stamping tool and then we can put that on. So I'm using this Stamp Easy platform. It's a, this is an A5 piece of card that I'm using in it. So I don't know, it's about 9 by, no, what would it be? I'm trying to think of the dimensions of it. So it's just larger than maybe an 8 by 10 kind of stamping platform there, but it's really easy to use. It's good value and it is available on my website if you're looking for a stamping tool. So I've stamped the happy in embossing ink and then I'm just adding some gold wow embossing powder. And that's going to, once heated up, give you a really nice shiny gold finish. And then in the sentiment set, all those other words that can be layered over, I'll show you how to stamp those even over your embossing. So just popping that one back, and I'm going to use Happy Everything, I think I used. So there's all sorts of birthday, Easter, happy thoughts, be happy. So back in my stamping tool for this. Now when you're stamping on top of embossing, because it's a kind of shiny surface, I'm not going to use that VersaFine ink that I use to stamp my main image because it could smudge and wipe off on top of the shiny embossing powder. So for this particular piece of stamping, I'm using the Stays On. This is more for shiny surfaces. You can stamp onto glass, plastic, acetate, that kind of thing, or indeed on top of embossing. So it's a drier ink pad, so I find I have to go in a couple of times, but that's just the type of ink it is. Oh, Happy Thoughts, sorry, I used, not Happy Everything, which is still a lovely, lovely sentiment, and I just love that scripty font over the top of the bold Happy. So I went in 3 times, and then that is absolutely going to be super permanent then, will not wipe off or smudge on top of that Happy. Finally, I'm just going to trim that down and mount it onto a card with some glitter paper just to make it really pop. But I hope you found that useful. Some good tips for pencil colouring, and I hope you give it a go with your new Claire Manning Creative products after the launch on the 2nd at 6 p.m. It will be live and there'll be more demonstrations then. Thank you and take care. I'll see you next time.